I use Google, I don't know, 10, 20 times a day. If I want to find someone, some article, some fact, some picture, I type a couple of words into that little box at the top of the computer screen or on my phone, and it usually works. That's why Google has become a mega corporation as well as a verb and is now worth $200 billion. But how big is too big, and how is it changing the culture in the news business? To answer that question, I sat down with the author of a new book, The Googlization of Everything, and Why We Should Worry. Siva Vaidhyanathan, welcome.
Thank you.
I should tell you that I Googled you when we were trying to decide whether to book you. I got to watch a video of you, so I thought you'd be pretty good on TV. I got your contact information. So clearly there are some benign benefits to Google.
Certainly. I mean, Google's improved our lives in so many material ways, so many measurable ways.
And yet you say you're worried about the power this company has amassed. You even liken it to Julius Caesar at one point in this book. But I would tell you, that's because of the free market. People like it. People use it.
It is. They've succeeded because they're very effective at what they do. But as consumers and as citizens, I think that it would be a wise move for us to try to understand better how Google works and what it does and what it hides, right? So that we have a sense that while Google provides so many important services for essentially no money to us, it also doesn't do so as a flat pane of glass. It's a lens that chooses some things and hides other things without censoring.
We'll get to that in a minute, but you do quote a lawyer for the company as saying competition is a click away. And indeed, if Google vanished from the earth tomorrow, we would all start using Yahoo or Microsoft's Bing or something else we've never heard of as a search engine.
Well, Google does much more than search, for one thing. But secondly,
Gmail and Google Maps and a whole host of applications.
This argument that Google's competition is just a click away ignores the billions of dollars sunken into glass and steel and cable that actually make up the infrastructure of Google. Vast server farms, tremendous bandwidth. That's why Google works so quickly. That's why it works so comprehensively. And that's why it satisfies so many of our needs with very few interruptions. And that actually is something heavy and expensive. So competition is actually not so close.
Does Google help or hurt news organizations that actually pay reporters? You don't have to, if you're not so inclined, go to the New York Times website or CNN.com. You can search for the one thing on the one story, whether it's Egypt or the Wisconsin budget battle, and you can find it through Google. Does that hurt news organizations?
I think ultimately that sort of environment helps both citizens and news organizations in the long term, largely because the certain news organizations, the particular news organizations that will do well in this environment are those that choose to understand Google. So look at how organizations like Huffington Post have excelled. Even the New York Times have excelled in terms of getting web readership since search engines, Google in particular, became the dominant way we find information. Those organizations have learned to master the environment. Now, that has positive and negative effects.
By which you mean, for those who are not computer savvy,
Sure.
They have learned to use certain phrases, keywords, headlines that will lift them up in the Google rankings and attract traffic,
Sure.
which is how they sell advertising.
And the bad way of looking at that is that Huffington Post is gaming the system. The good way is Huffington Post has figured out a model to attract a lot of attention. Of course, I think the biggest threat in journalism is actually Huffington Post because it's actually taking and attracting attention for its advertisers and repositioning the work done by local news organizations. That's a very different
environment.
environment.
Is a threat to us all?
I think the Huffington Post is a much stronger threat to local journalism and to independent journalism organizations than Google is. Google actually does nothing but help as far as I can see.
Well, maybe that's why AOL paid $350 million for the Huffington Post. Now, Google's strength, as you write in this book, comes from harvesting information about us and then using that to attract advertising. A lot of people like ads that are tailored to, if they're interested in skydiving stories or the town that they live in, but others can opt out.
Right. So part of the problem is most of us don't understand what it takes to opt out. Most of us don't understand that it might be in our best interest to opt out. When you're just interacting with Google and you haven't read widely in how Google works, then you're likely not even to know there might be a problem. And even opting out takes several steps. And having that sort of burden on the user, I think, is basically unfair.
You think that should be easier. Now, Google likes to position itself as being basically a collection of algorithms. In other words, this is all done automatically, whether you have a great store or a newspaper or a site that sells socks. It makes the rankings based on who links to you and things like that. But as you point out, sometimes human beings get involved. So that, for example, the #1 link at one point, if you Googled Jew, was an anti-Semitic site called JewWatch, and Google stepped in and changed that.
Well, Google did its best in the United States to keep its distance so that JewWatch News actually still pops up for searches for the word Jew and for other Jewish-related sites. And that's one of those things that Google has been hesitant to censor, although it censors it actively in places like Germany and France, where, of course, the law prevents people from presenting anti-Semitic information, or propaganda, rather. And under those situations, though, Google is being a little bit duplicitous, because Google will tell the organizations that complain about that it can't do anything in the U.S. because Google doesn't interfere. But we know of 100 different cases in which Google took an active decision to either hide something or make something higher.
Now, another thing that troubles you is you say that potential employers, somebody's applying for a job, can access your past indiscretions through Google or lots of other search engines. Have you looked at what people voluntarily put on Facebook?
Yeah, and one of the things I know from dealing with young people in my day job at the University of Virginia is that young people are actually highly aware of this challenge right now. There's not a high school in America that doesn't discuss the issue of sharing too much in the wrong context. But both Google and Facebook do rip us out of our contexts. They let us assume comfortably at one point that we're dealing with a set of people, let's say our friends, or let's say our family. And it's not quite easy to unpack for people, especially this early in the evolution of the digital environment, that 5-10 years down the line, and it's not just a problem for kids, it's a problem for all of us, our presentation of self within one environment will be misinterpreted in another. That's the real danger, and I don't think we haven't figured out the behaviors and norms to deal with this.
And you can be defined by the single most embarrassing or stupid thing you've ever done, because that's what comes up number one. Now, I also want to touch on books. So you believe that Google is going too far in digitizing books, and in effect becoming the world's library. And there are copyright issues involved. As an author, I worry about that. But the positive side is that this can also make obscure and out-of-print books accessible to all of us that we would never be able to get access to.
That's true. And let's also remember, though, that Google is not necessarily the best agent to do that kind of work. It's certainly the agent that was willing to put up the money. And I'm not sure that that's a good enough excuse.
So you want Google to stop? You want to pull the plug on this
effort? I actually think Google should do whatever's good for Google. I would rather that the libraries that are assisting Google ask some harder questions and be more strong negotiators when it comes to things like user confidentiality, right? If you're a library user and you're in a library system, you know that the library is not sharing your information. But there's a quick flip to the Google system where Google is gathering your information and keeping a record of where you go. Those are the sorts of hazards that I'm afraid that libraries have not been aggressive enough about.
Since this is television, I need a short answer. Google's motto, as you know, motto is "Don't be evil." Does it live up to that on balance?
That motto distracts us from all the things that it must do as a company. And so I'm not willing to say that Google does evil or does not do evil. I know that Google causes friction, trouble, and stress all over the world in various different ways. And so some people might call some of its actions evil. I think a much more interesting question is whether we buy into the question of whether Google does evil or does not. And I think we should rise above that and recognize that Google's just a company. It's going to do what's best for the company. It might do what's best in the long run, and that might coincide with our interests, but it might not always.
The Googlization of everything. Siva, thanks very much for joining us.
Appreciate it.